Yes, Nigerians got that memo yesterday. Some are probably waking up to that news, but that is what it is. And this morning, as you've seen, we're joined by Mr. Kola Ayeye, right here in our Lagos studio. He's an economist and CEO, GDL Asset Management Limited. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Kawade, thank you very much for having me here.
So quite a lot to unwrap with that one. I mean, we're still just trying to handle and internalize the redesigning of the Naira. It was just this day 2 weeks ago that the president unveiled those new Naira notes, and then this one. We'll get into, I mean, your immediate reactions, but just to reiterate, some of the new, the policies, some of the, elements of that policy. So as you may have seen, maximum cash withdrawal of over-the-counter, 100,000 for individuals, 500,000 for companies. But then there's this caveat that withdrawals above that limit, it attracts 5% and 10% processing fees. So you can just do the math. Whatever it is you're withdrawing above that limit, you have processing fees. Of course, the maximum cash withdrawal per week for ATM, 100,000, subject to a maximum of 20,000 Naira cash withdrawal per day. And it goes on and on. Mr. Ayeye, I know that you've worked with banks at the very top level. You've worked with some sort of, can I say, at the agency level for government, some sort of, what do I call AMCON now?
AMCON, yes, yes.
So you understand how these things work. You know the level at which they see the data, they see the market, and come to those decisions. So for you, from that vantage point, how do these decisions actually come to being announced? How do they make these decisions, particularly this one? What do you think were the considerations put in place?
Okay, thank you very much, Kawade. I think coming shortly after the Naira redesign policy, it sends a signal that CBN wants to reduce reliance on cash and wants to accelerate the digitization of the economy. So my view about the policy is that in itself, I don't think it's bad. If individuals can withdraw 100,000 Naira a week, it means that they can withdraw 400,000 Naira in a month. Once the policy came out, I phoned 2 housewives and I asked them, for a family of 5, how much do you need to shop?
In terms of cash or?
Just to shop, because we need to be aware that not most Nigerians don't shop in supermarkets. The average Nigerian still goes to the market. That's where they buy. And I do not think that the market out there, those market stalls, the ojas, as Yorubas call it, I do not think those places are significantly digitized. And we want to do these things without inconveniencing people. So my first concern was, is 400,000 Naira sufficient for what a family needs? And the indications I got from 2 housewives at different ends of the spectrum. One said, I could shop for my family with 50,000. Another one said 150,000. So 400,000 is sufficient. So in terms of the policy itself, maybe there isn't a problem with it per se. My concern is with the focus. Do we need to invest as much energy as we are doing in controlling cash? Is that our biggest problem now? You see, in terms of the details of a policy, save for saying that you can't withdraw more than 20,000 Naira from ATMs daily. That's the only thing. I don't think you should make it more convenient for people to receive cash in the banking hall than in their ATMs. Because there's nothing in this regulation that says you can't go to the banking hall and get 100,000. So if I can go into a banking hall and collect 100,000 in a day, I should also be able to go to an ATM and collect 100,000. So broadly, I don't see anything wrong with the policy, but I have a problem with the emphasis. I have a problem with the focus. I do not think this is our biggest problem now.
Maximum cash withdrawal over the counter by individuals, 100,000 Naira. For corporates, 500,000 Naira. If you want to go above that, you pay processing fees and all of that. You think a lot of energy is being put into this, and you think that this is not where we should be focusing our energy on. But on the other side, you think this is a good policy, ultimately, if it controls, the cash flow, or at least the way cash is being handled in the system. Am I right?
The thing is, you see, the total money supply is somewhere around 46 trillion. The entire cash outside banks is only 2.7 trillion. So all of this effort on cash is 6% of money supply. So even if you achieve all your objectives, you are dealing with only 6% of money supply.
So what should the CBN be doing to get the remaining, what is it, 94%?
Okay. Now, so that's, I mean, just to make the point again, in terms of details, you know, the ABCD of the policy is substantially okay. But I'm not sure that this is what will move the needle for where Nigerians are, as I said. Now, in context of our 46 trillion of money supply, what is a big problem that we have? And it's been in the press that through ways and means, the federal government has borrowed 24 trillion. Those are the things that 4-5 months to the end of the current regime, I think that's what should be engaging the attention of CBN, of sitting with the fiscal authorities to say, what do we do? What can government do to pay down this debt, which is not only huge? You know, 24 trillion is almost half of money supply. It's also illegal because we are made to understand that the CBN Act limits the amount CBN, I mean, the government is supposed to borrow from CBN to just about 250 billion. I mean, look at those two spectrums. The maximum should be 250 billion. We are 24 trillion.
What about in extreme cases when, I mean, there's clear cash crunch, revenue crunch?
Laws are laws. Laws should be obeyed. I don't think we should find ways to break laws. If the law says that and the law does not stop the government from borrowing. It only says borrowing from CBN. So what that law is saying is that if you want to borrow, go through a structured process. So go to the financial markets.
About force majeure, doctrine of necessity, and all of that, you think it doesn't apply? We have not been at war. I mean, can't they get this? 24 trillion out of 46 trillion is huge. Is huge. And in terms of its effect, I think that's what has led to very high inflation. It has contributed to the devaluation of the currency, and it needs to be addressed. So India also did this in 2016. India went through this demonetization process, and the results have been mixed. Here, it did not have such a significant impact on economic activity, you know. So we can get this right, and everything about it can work. What I'm saying is that what does it do for the ordinary man? What does it do for the 133 million people who are living under poverty? You know, what does it do for the 62% unemployment and underemployment of youths? I mean, those are the issues. I mean, so I don't think that this is, because you also need to know that in any organization, including a country, there is a finite amount of energy, of management attention, and of intellectual resource. You see, the energy you use to drive this policy means that if you have a finite amount of energy, you have something less to do the other things. I do not think, in my view, I don't disagree with the policy, but I disagree with the emphasis. I wouldn't do it now. I don't think it's priority. The implementation will generally be with the banks, yes, as it were, and the banks already have the resources, I imagine. I mean, I imagine that CBN will not have to get an extra workforce or work extra hours just to implement this. The banks have the responsibility. Of course, CBN is a regulator, oversees all of that. So when you say that more energy will be put into this, where do you see that energy coming from?
Okay,
for the banks or CBN?
There was a policy of CBN that was aborted several years ago. You know, shortly after the bank consolidation exercise, CBN wanted to do a Naira. They wanted to strengthen the currency by. I forget the term.
Extra security feature.
No, where you just change the decimal places. It's like decimalization of the currency. One of my concerns before even it was dropped was, you see, it's easy to say that it's going to be handled by the bank. The reality is that when you are changing currency, it affects the entire economy. And it's not just going to take the effort of the banks. It's something that the Ministry of Finance will be interested in what is going on. The presidency will be interested in how effectively it is going on. We cannot say that this is going to be done without management attention on the part of government. I am saying that 5 months to the end of this administration, this government is owing CBN 24 trillion naira, which it should not be owing it. Now, this effort is focused on something for which the total size is 2.7 trillion naira. I think that's not the place where effort should be directed. It will help. It is nice. It also, I hope it also doesn't make life too uncomfortable for the informal sector. As I said, I think 400,000 naira per month, is okay, But is this what we should be paying attention to? We have bigger problems that should be the basis of the engagement of the central bank with the government. Just on that point, what I'm saying, for example, is that if the CBN governor goes into the presidency today, I reckon that one of the first things that will be on the table is how is this policy going on. I'm saying that should not be the agenda.
Naturally, and you'd expect that the president should be hands-on, understand what is going on everywhere. But you mentioned the ways and means. You've mentioned unemployment.
Yes.
I think you talked about inflation as well. But really, primarily, how much can CBN do to curb unemployment, for example? So in terms of the CBN Act, its responsibility, first, you agree that this is within its right. You say that it's also good, but all those other challenges you mentioned, how much can CBN do?
In fact, in anywhere in the world, a major mandate of central bank is price stability. And price stability means that the CBN globally is expected to do its best to keep inflation low.
No, unemployment rather. It was unemployment I was particular about.
So while unemployment is not a key mandate of the CBN, but indirectly, when you keep inflation low and you achieve price stability, what you are doing is that you are supporting economic growth. And economic growth ultimately leads to improved employment. You see, the fiscal side and the monetary side, they are not enemies. They're supposed to be a check on one another, but they're also supposed to collaborate. You see, the objectives which are globally set for the monetary authorities is because when those objectives are met, it is supportive of economic growth. And when economic growth is achieved, you have employment.
So CBN focuses on inflation.
Yes.
There's the unemployment. There's the poverty figures, which you talked about as well, and all of that. And I know that the president, the vice president have talked about this harmonization of the fiscal and the monetary authorities. But, for the everyday man, as we say, they listen to this announcement. First, they're still trying to grapple or at least internalize with the new Naira notes, the redesign, trying to ensure that they get all the monies in the banks and all of that before the deadline. And now this comes. What kind of impacts, now short-term, immediate, do you think this will have directly on, as I say, the average man on the street? Do you think this is something good for them? Because, as you said, a lot of people think, how much money do I even carry around these days? And they think about security as well. They think about maybe inflation, of course, that affects them. So do you think this is good for the average man, the 133 million Nigerians or more in poverty as of today?
I want to say again, I don't want to appear to be unnecessarily slamming the CBN or government. There is nothing overly bad about this policy. But this policy is not positive for the average man. What it's actually going to do is that it will lead to a slight slowdown in the velocity of transactions. Because you are changing things. You are saying some of the things, the ease with which you used cash before, is going to be reduced. What it's going to do in the short run is that there will be a slight reduction in the velocity of transactions, and that will reduce output.
How do you mean velocity of transactions? Because you can just do transfers instead of giving cash.
So that means that if I wasn't used to doing transfers, if I didn't like transfers, if that's not my preferred modus of transactions, and I have to make a transition, I have a learning period, I have a setup period, I have to acquire some gadgets, I may have to get used to cards. What that does is that for a short period, it will slow down the rate of transactions. Right. That's normal. That's what happens. Now, it will also lead to a slight reduction in output or GDP. It ultimately corrects itself. It won't be long lasting.
So that's maybe negligible.
I think it will be negligible. However, for where we are at, my point is, why is this the priority? Why?
I mean, that's a very interesting question, but Malkwe has a few more questions for you this morning. Malkwe, over to you.
I would like to go back a bit to when you were talking about the policy of the CBN as introduced. I don't know sometimes, though. You know that oftentimes, or most of the times, or all of the times, the CBN will only have the best of intentions for the Nigerian economy, and wants to do its job in the best way possible. But I don't know if you've ever been privy to any of the, let's say, I don't want to say decision-making, meetings, but are you able to look through or look to a crystal ball and say, this is the reason why, or this is how the CBN came about certain decisions? Because when you look at this regulation which they have just come up with, or the guidelines which they have now come up with for banks, some people will say, yes, we can see what the goal will be, but looking at the figures that they have come up with, you have to ask, how did they arrive at those figures?
Well, to be fair to the central bank has a very well-equipped research department. For some years, I used to read the central bank annual reports. And to be fair, the central bank annual reports used to be a product of very excellent research. So I think we should concede to the central bank that they have a well-kitted research function. A decision such as changing currency, even by its nature, has to be, for it to achieve its effect, has to come to everyone as a surprise. I mean, that's the way it's done anywhere it's done. So none of us has a window into how these decisions are taken. What we are left with is to assess what its impacts will be and then make a judgment as to whether it was a good call. I repeat again that I think 100,000 per week for individuals, which gives people cash of 400,000 naira per month. I think for most families will not need to spend more than 400,000 naira cash monthly. So I think that covers their need. Where I think is the issue is, in India when this was done, it did not significantly move the needle in terms of economic contribution, either in terms of reducing counterfeiting or bringing more people into the tax net, or reducing corruption by confiscating illegally acquired funds. It didn't significantly move the needle. So what I'm saying is, if you look at the facts of the policy, it would be unfair to say anything is wrong with it per se. But if you look at, in terms of what our priorities should be at this point, I doubt that this is what we should be expending energy on. And on that, I'm very highly persuaded. I do not think this is what should be taking a lot of our energy at this time.
So granted, it is true that many Nigerian families, 400,000 naira a month as a cash limit, should be all right. But when you also look at when this policy is being implemented, at the end of the year, when we have a lot of festivities, oftentimes you also find that there is a rush for many celebrations. People are traveling, and oftentimes when they're traveling, there's also a demand for cash, because you don't know what can happen on the road, and sometimes it's not like as if the internet network is that great. So you have all of this mix going on towards the end of the year, and you see a policy like this. New currency is about to be introduced mid this month. It's going to run till the end of January. How do you think that this is going to be received by a lot of Nigerians at this time, considering the fact that we're in the month of December, the month of festivities?
Mark, haven't you noticed that Nigerians are battle weary? I think Nigerians are going through so much that I think they've even lost the energy to protest. People barely just are able to whimper or whisper. I don't think Nigerians are going to protest much. I honestly think that with what the plan was for the currencies to run in parallel on the January 31st, I think it will run its course. What I will keep saying to those of you in the fourth estate of the realm is that there is a big needs to be addressed. 24 trillion in ways and means, a significant increase in domestic debt to 21 trillion naira. That's what the federal government owes, apart from the ways and means. An increase in external debt to $36 billion from the $10 billion that it was when this government came into power. Those are big issues. So we should not allow ourselves to be distracted. If the president and the CBN governor want to change currency, we should say, okay, well done. But please, how are you going to pay this 24 trillion? It's illegal. And when it is paid, and if it is paid properly, if government finds the right way to find the money, because it's tough, if government finds the right way to find the money to pay it, it will bring down inflation. It will contribute to a strengthening of the Naira. So let's insist that we will not be distracted. It is their right to change the currency. But we should say that there are huge problems you need to address. Will you kindly address it? That will be my approach.
Well, you've just talked about ways and means, and some people will say that perhaps this is also a part of it. I mean, trying to reduce inflationary pressures by ensuring that, they bring in as much money as they can into the system. But I'm wondering, at the end of the day, when the federal government is still looking for resources, and it is the federal government that is borrowing this money, it's not exactly the Nigerian people, borrowing directly from the CBN. It is the federal government which is looking for ways to shore up its resources, making sure that it's able to, fund certain parts of the budget, not just the budget, but also fund some other crucial expenditure items, especially when it comes to looking at the poverty figures that we have, etc. There are big questions as to how. Would you see any link, and I think Ekaidu was already asking that question, any link between what the central bank is trying to do and what the government has been trying to do, and how all of this is going to affect? Is the central bank, pulling what the Nigerian government is trying to push into the economy?
Makwa, thank you very much. You see, that's actually where the problem is. 2.7 trillion out of 46 trillion will not make any dent on inflation. It will not. That's just the truth. This is not what will control inflation. This is not what caused inflation. It's not the 2.7 trillion cash outside the banks that caused inflation. It's the 24 trillion which was borrowed. It's the fact that at the beginning of this government, as recently as 2015, the federal annual budget was just 5 trillion. This government has increased the annual budget to 17 trillion at a time when it's also not been able to control oil theft. I mean, just look at the contradiction. On the one hand, you want a much, much, much bigger budget. At the same time, the major source of your revenue has almost been halved by theft. Those are the big issues. Let me say it very clearly. It's okay to want to change currency if you want to. It's a good thing. It's a nice, fancy thing to do. It doesn't, I don't think it will hurt people much. But that's not where we are bleeding. Where we are bleeding is that exchange rate was 197 on the street. We all know where it is. It is way over 700. It's not this 2.7 trillion that is going to change it. So so what I'm saying is, growing up, I learned a few Yoruba proverbs. There's a Yoruba proverb that says that it's not that ringworm is bad. But when you have leprosy, you should, first of all, you should deal with the leprosy and not ignore the leprosy and deal with the ringworm. Ringworm is ugly. You don't like ringworm. But hey, we have a bigger problem to deal with. I don't take issues with the fact that government wants to change the currency. What I'm saying is that it will have been nice for us to get the sense that there is continuous engagement within the monetary and fiscal authorities about how not to hand over to the next government a huge amount of debt, which is not only significant, but which is at variance with our laws, which has caused inflation, and which has contributed to devaluation.
Okay, let me just pick it up from there. Right. As you said, next government now. Yes. And I know a lot of Nigerians are looking at what's playing out now, and they're trying to see, okay, who's going to fit best? Who's going to make the decisions that I would think will reduce all of these indices, which you have talked about? Inflation, unemployment, the rate of the Naira to the dollar, for example. Of course, that's linked to another issue. Maybe we'll touch on that. But for you, as an economist, you have a sense of data, I imagine, and perhaps the pedigree of the different candidates. I know there's a political angle, but for Nigerians who are looking to the candidates, 6 months to go for this administration, you think that they have other decisions to be making, to be expending energy for? What do you think Nigerians should focus on in terms of rating all of these candidates to make the right decision such that they would feel the effect economically? What should they look for primarily? And I'm not just talking president, because I know the focus is always on the president, but we have governors as well who have a major role to play. There was recently a back and forth between the federal government and the governors as to who is responsible for poverty, but I think the consensus is that they are all responsible, even local government. So what do you think Nigerians should look out for? What is most important for them?
I've always said that our biggest problem is corruption. I will keep repeating it. Progress is not possible with the level of corruption we have. It just will not happen. One of my biggest disappointments with the current regime is that I expected this regime to make much, much more progress in terms of control of corruption. That hasn't worked out. So Nigerians need to know. Nigerians need to look for honesty and frugality in choosing candidates. If a candidate comes to the table and shows that he's frugal and he's honest and he will curb waste, we need it because we are broke. I don't envy anyone who is going to take over any of these positions, whether on the fiscal side or the monetary side. This, I mean, just for a moment, the amount of debt we owe now, it will take almost 60% of federal government revenues just to service debt or more. This is near bankruptcy. So Nigerians should look for people with a track record of frugality, of honesty, you know, a defendable anti-corruption stance, not out of a moral point of view, but because it is a necessity. Then the next thing will be, you know, a problem is rarely ever solved at the level at which it was created. Anyone who is going to take a state or the nation away from the problems we have has to reinvent governance, have to come with a level of thinking of a partnership between the private sector and government that takes it to a totally different level, because that is what is going to attract and generate the resources that we need to pull us out of this hole. Clearly, anyone that can position Nigeria in such a way that our diaspora resource will contribute much, much more significantly to the transformation of the economy is another thing we should look at. You know, I've always said that without any special measure, without any special push, Nigerians in diaspora send between $20 and $25 billion to the country annually. We need a government that is very innovative in creating platforms that may make that 75 or 100 billion, and is create frameworks and instruments that will make it make sense for Nigerians abroad to take money against their houses and send home because of the kind of program that has been created. Kayode, we're not in a good place. We are not in a good place, and you need a government that is frugal, you need a government that is honest, then you need a government that comes to the table with innovation in governance.
Because when you think about it, I mean, the diaspora remittances are a major source of forex.
Yes.
I mean, with crude oil, what we do is swap. So you don't really get the dollar or the whatever foreign exchange. But on a final note, we've talked about what people should look out for. We have just about a minute. What do you think should be big on the agenda of anybody who will be in government or who will come into government to at least shake things up well? What should be big on their agenda?
You must kick corruption down.
Okay.
You must keep corruption down. You must attract significant investments from Nigerians abroad. On the back of that, I think a lot of foreign investment will then come in.
I think you've been consistent with that corruption issue, and I think that's a great place to anchor. We'll be speaking with Mr. Kolaye, who's an economist and the CEO of GDL Asset Management Limited. It's good to have you again in our latest studio.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.